a cliff along the Green River, the Rio Verde, in the high Sierra of Chihuahua, the Sierra Madre, with apologies to John Huston and the actor in The Treasure of the Sierra, Humphrey Bogart, of course. With apologies to those guys, this is the place. And we know a lot about this area, and we know about, the only thing we know about the actual collection of these remains come from two sources. One is a very famous source, Karl Lumholtz, who published, Lumholtz is kind of a Alexander von Humboldt type character who does his geographical and cultural explorations in Mexico and Central America in the last part of the 1890s, and publishes a book called Unknown Mexico in 1902. Humboldt's kind of interesting. I'll have a few words about him. But he traveled widely in this area and was the first to note these burial caves. You can see them right here, and these are the same ones right here. This is from his book. This is the same exact formation, and you can see us visiting it in back in 2001, just before I arrived in Detroit. I went down here, spent 2 or 3 months working on this case, and so that's where the remains come from. We know with a certain level of uncertainty, very small, that they came in fact from this cave right here, to the right on the center of the picture there. But we rely on I will rely today a little bit on Lumholtz's description of this area at the time to give you some flavor for that part of the network that refers specifically to the remains and the sites, the places that they related to, and the types of artifacts associated and whatnot. Well, here's Lumholtz. He's a Norwegian. He traveled widely in not only in North America, but also here he is, all set to go in Australia, where he wrote a volume. I think the title was "Living with Cannibals." And although he picked that kind of sensationalist title for his book, he was really better than most at the time at providing real ethnographic information about these places. So when I say rely, I really mean it. This is good ethnography. The trip to Australia and the mention of cannibals was obviously just a tickler, I guess, because there don't appear to be any cannibals or well-known cannibals in Australia at that time or ever since, except maybe in the police blotter or something like that. He also went on to found the Explorers Club, which I'm sure some of you are aware of as this kind of, well, it's become a place where people who do archaeology can sometimes find funding, but it's a rather important institution. Lumholtz took this very detailed approach and left us with lots of information. So he's important in the story to understanding any of this network, both past and present. Well, what was he all interested in? He was interested in this neck of the woods, in Chihuahua, in the Sierra Madre, in the mountains that are really the southern extension of the Rocky Mountains, in the societies that lived there in the time before the coming of the white man, before the coming of the Spanish conquerors, the conquistadors, in the centuries just before that, which, by the way, as you might guess from this picture, was a relatively dynamic time as well, because the area is well known for these cliff dwellings. This is a rather spectacular one, but they're all over the place. And by the way, this style of living is present in northwestern Mexico, but also the southwestern U.S. Cliff dwelling and adobe structures like this is part of a very large cultural area of the part of the residential repertoire, pieces of the network that exist there as well. And I would say that when one looks at the archaeology of this area, there are both places hanging off cliffs like this, but there's also places down in valleys that look like they're not that defensive. But there was a fair amount of conflict, and there were security issues back at this time as well. So this is the area I'm talking about. It's the border between Sonora and Chihuahua, in really high up in the Sierra Madre, south of the border between U.S. and Mexico, really northwestern Mexico and southwestern U.S. are really, in any cultural sense, part of the same area. So you see a couple of very archaeological type things here. This is what was once called the Anasazi area. Some of you might be familiar with that term, and it's centered on the Four Corners region in the southwest U.S. Most people in the know refer to the area's ancestral pueblo today. And you might, if you visited places out west, been to a place like Mesa Verde where you can see cliff dwellings at the other side of the world from the area that I'm talking about. This is one large culture area. It's made up of different segments. The Hohokam area, centered on present-day Phoenix. The Mogollon area, which is this huge area that kind of overlaps with them all, and probably encompasses the area that was the location of the Cave Valley mummies, and which was part of a larger domain called Paquimé, or Casas Grandes culture, between about 1200 and 1400 AD, as I said before, just before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors in this area. Well, the area holds together for many reasons. And here I'm talking about the area in and around where the Cave Valley mummies were found. Like many other areas, there are certain kind of characteristics, symbols, indicators of a unity within this area. Many of the cultures of northwest Mexico, especially during Casas Grandes times, use a kind of sky serpent that's very prevalent in that area. And then often they put them along the tops of buildings to kind of evoke where sky serpents are. They also have these very interesting sort of keyhole doors that are found, as I mentioned, throughout this part of the U.S. Southwest and the Mexican Northwest, that are things at a very high level suggest that there's some sort of unity, there's some sort of cultural connection, there's some sort of identity sharing amongst all of these cultures in this area, and that make them different from cultures elsewhere. Although I suppose you find keyhole doors in many parts of the world. It's very prevalent in this area. This is the sort of context that I'm talking about for the Cave Valley mummies. You can see here's our keyhole door here. This is an overhang, kind of cramped area that during the time of the Casas Grandes culture, and during the time that the Cave Valley mummies were interred, would have been, this is the sort of context that these people would have at least spent part of their life in. There are ruins both inside the caves and elsewhere, and we don't know for sure whether they spent their entire time in the caves. They might have spent some time inside, sometimes outside. But one thing we know for sure is that they buried their dead in the places where they lived. So they were, you know, to use a somewhat now hackneyed phrase, they were living with the ancestors. And they both lived with them, and they put the ancestors in places that didn't have any residential evidence, but also just caves that were for the interment of the dead. And this cave is, in fact, our best guess of where the mummies that I'm talking about today were found. And as you can see, all of these places had been looted and disturbed, and otherwise the integrity of the